Given the current state of the global economy, a section of the Indian startup ecosystem feels there is a drop in startup investments both in size and numbers. This has given birth to the new buzzword funding winter, by the way, which is also doing rounds in certain media circles. T-Hub organized a panel talk titled Funding Winter to determine if there is actually a funding crisis. The panel comprised of eminent VC and entrepreneurs. T-Hub CEO Srinivas Mahankali moderated the session, and he began by introducing the distinguished panel. Listening.
So good afternoon, and first of all, thank you for all being here, and a warm welcome to my very distinguished panelists. I don't think any one of them needs an introduction, but for those of you who are not familiar with them, I'll just do a quick round. So Vani is, how do you say son of the soil? I mean, Warner is a daughter of the soil. So Vani is, happens to be an OU alumnus, and then of course went on to build. She's had a career in many parts. She's been an entrepreneur, successful entrepreneur, and then a very successful VC with more than 7 unicorns, which she's managed, right? We also have Sandeep from Moglix. Moglix, Sandeep was telling me, is the Amazon for industrial supplies. So anything anyone wants from a fabrication or building something out, they take care of industrial supplies. They have 1,500 people in all and about 70 people in Hyderabad. So thank you for being here, Sandeep. And then of course, our youngest soon-to-be unicorn, Prabhdeep, who runs StanPlus, which solves a very critical need, I guess particularly during COVID, about ambulance services. Just providing high quality, end-to-end ambulance services. So thank you for being here. And today we're going to talk about a very interesting theme. All of you have been following the media. This whole thing about funding winter started by Sequoia and then SoftBank and so on has caught fire. So we're going to talk about it, and what we'll try and do during the next 45 minutes is try and get a perspective from a VC lens, right, and from an entrepreneur lens, right? So we'll try and cover that. So some numbers to start with. Obviously funding, I just saw in Q2, the numbers reported by ET, they did a joint survey with PwC. Funding has fallen by about 40%. It has come down to, it was about just over 10 billion in Q1, and it's come down to 6.3 billion. Second data point was about unicorns. We had crossed 100, I think, sometime in early Jan or Feb. We've just added 4 unicorns during the Q2 compared to, we added about 40 unicorns last year. So approximately, let's say 10 a quarter. It's come down to about 4, right? We also saw a lot of other things happening. Some, significantly enhanced merger and acquisition activity. So for example, Blinkit acquiring, Zomato acquiring Blinkit, and so on. And then many IPOs got delayed. So I guess companies like Ola, PharmEasy put their IPOs on the back burner because of this thing, right? So we live now in a world where, to use a phrase from the 80s, we live in a VUCA world, right? Very volatile, very uncertain, complex and ambiguous. And then we've had, I guess, high inflation, right? High interest rates. Then supply side, we've had 2 devastating events, 2 black swan events of the last couple of years, right? And of course, post-COVID, many economies are struggling, particularly some of our neighbors, which were heavily tourism and commodity dependent, etc. Right? So with all of that, right, I thought this is a good context to discuss, what you see, right? So I'll start with the first question, and I think this is something which Vamshi talked about. So he said, what exactly does funding winter mean? And I think he's a fan of Game of Thrones. So I'm going to steal a leaf from his book. And he talks about, with everyone referring to the, GOT narrative of winter. So maybe we can start with Vani, right? So what exactly, when you hear this word funding winter, how do you relate to the funding winter?
I also don't know really what it means. In a very simple way, I would say if you receive funding, then obviously it is spring. If you don't receive funding, then it's winter. So I think this notion also of this winter or spring is very specific to every company and situation. So I don't think we need to feel like, oh, there is like a fog that is gonna make it impossible for anybody to get funding. That's not the case. First of all, we ourselves are very actively funding. I suppose since he doesn't want me to say MSR Garu, so, but since he asked the question, I suppose it really is to mean that many companies will struggle to receive funding. But that's the point. It could be many, and many companies, though always, even in the best of times, struggle to get funding. Maybe more do now. And the dynamics of what companies get funding might have shifted. But solid ideas and companies with core fundamentals are continuing to raise funds. It may not be at the valuations that you want necessarily, but it's not that there is zero capital in the market. In fact, there is a lot of capital in the market. So I actually think we are obsessing because somebody put that concept out there, and we are kind of obsessing on this funding winter concept. That's my view.
So you're saying that money is still available for good ideas, for good teams, and for good execution. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Vani. So let me go with Sandeep first, right? So Sandeep, as someone who's in the trenches and building a company, right? So what are you seeing? And if you could, given your own, I'm assuming you're either have raised funding or in the fundraise mode. So what are you seeing?
Yeah. So first of all, we have raised enough funding, and I always tell my team this term is quite frequently used, funding winter. Hyderabad, we don't see so much of winter, so we don't know what sort of preparation we need to take for winter, but I come from Dehradun, which is, you see, pretty severe winter. And I remember when winter was approaching, we used to, get our woolens out, put them in the sun. So, you need to conserve energy, you need to retain more heat in the body to deal with. And I think that's what we are seeing from a startup standpoint, that when winter is arriving, you need to start holding more heat and conserve energy, pretty much what it means. We keep looking for buzzwords. The world is about buzzwords. I would say it's just getting a little more attention probably than what it should. Inflation is not new to India. I think right now it's the macro which is playing. Suddenly Europe and US have seen the inflation which India has been, ever since I remember the term inflation, it's been high in India, so it's nothing unique. So all I would say is it's one of the seasons. Every year you see 3 seasons. You see summer, you see rainy, you see winter. All you have to do is just prepare for each season in the right manner. When it rains, you get your raincoats out, you get your umbrellas out. When it's winter, you get the wood out. If the winter lasts a little long, you will need more wood, more woolens. That's what you prepare for. I would say it's nothing more than that. The other thing is it's not something that you can react to it as an organization. If you have not been operating in a manner that you are ready for winter any day, suddenly, let's say, doesn't happen in India, but Europe, US, temperature drops by 25, 30 degrees in a single day if it rains unplanned. So you've got to be ready for winter in a very, very unplanned manner as well. at times. So all I would say is we don't need to really react or get hyper. There's enough money available out in the market. You just got to be running in the right manner to deal with the winter. But, it's one of the seasons, as per me, nothing new or nothing to panic about.
Thanks, Sandeep. So I think in some ways you kind of echoed what Vani said in some ways, in the sense that you said, this is just a passing phase. It's like another passing, recurring seasonal phase. And second is you have to anyway, even in the best of times, you have to be prepared, right? In summer, you have to be prepared for winter and vice versa. So I think, so great point. Vani, there's a follow-up question before I go to Prabhdeep, right? As someone who's seen, for example, let's say 2001, then you've seen 2008, right? And now you're seeing this, right? So how are you seeing anything different here compared to, from, Prabhdeep is too young to probably answer the 2001 and 8 questions. So that's why I thought I'll start with you.
I think he already told us that he's too young while we were outside. So some things are the same. Whenever there is sort of a major recessionary event and a crash, right? I mean, simple fiscal principles continue to get reinforced, both at a personal level and at a work level. And they're not that different. In fact, we sometimes forget that the common sense we use with our personal finances is really the same way you should think about running a company. What are the sort of leveraged risks that you are able to take? Can you create value for that risk, right? And it's really around this word leverage. How much leverage are you going to bring in? When times are good, the leverage may pay off. If the times are bad, and depending on how bad, the leverage can put you into a debt spiral that you can't really come out of easily, right? What does that mean? I mean, you have high working capital loans, you struggle to collect, you have debts that you are not able to service, and new capital that you are not able to raise, right? Now, access to capital, access to debt, all these things become difficult whenever there is a financial crisis. By the way, not just for startups. In the 2008 crash, famously, GE could not meet their payables because debt didn't get released to them. So we're talking about a blue chip, a corporate bond, kind of a company with not able to get temporarily debt, right? They said we had never seen that in our entire history, right? So it's always available, maybe at a price, but they just couldn't. Obviously, have you weathered through it from a leadership decision? But maybe it's a topic for later. How do you weather through this? So I think the core fiscal principles and how you weather through it, those really don't change. It's just that people think they're reinventing something new. It's just the history that they haven't learned or read. That's really the only thing. But what is different this time is the number of people who have seen such cycles, let's say in a New York or a Silicon Valley, from a startup perspective, there is that memory, it's like in a game reserve, the herd remembers the last time there was a famine. That could have been 10 years ago. Or, the water hole dried away or whatever. They know how to survive, right? That is there in a muscle memory or, learning memory, even in an animal in a savanna. I think Indian startup companies haven't seen it. That's what is different, right? It's not that we haven't seen it globally. And I was running a company in 2000 when the crash happened, right? So I remember that and what it all meant at that time. And 2008, I think the startup India was very small still. So they didn't quite see the pain of that. Plus, India got a bit insulated in 2008. It didn't really, the subprime crisis, whatever was happening globally, did not affect India as much because our dependence to that, because it was really the global banks that got affected, and hence, your access to debt and all of that. So India really didn't get that affected in 2000. India as in Indian startups didn't get that affected. So I really think this is so what is different is, I think this is the first time, right? We know, for example, like a Klarna went from 65 billion to 6.5 billion overnight, right? What is the leadership needed when something like that happens? At so many levels, managing complex shareholders who are, of course, out for your blood. They lost 90% of their money. And employees who are not motivated. You yourself have to think, what do I do? How do I sail this ship now? And so I think it's a very different test of leadership. We haven't had that in India. And that test, and what will emerge from that test, hasn't happened in India yet.
So when the going gets tough, the tough get going.
Yeah, I mean, the tough or the smart or somebody gets going and somebody doesn't. And we have to learn from that.
Okay. So Prabhdeep, as someone who raised funding very recently, right? So obviously you raised funding at the right time, right? Touch wood. Now, how do you see it? So obviously you're expanding, and I'm assuming you probably have to raise some more funding, near term. How are you seeing this? How are you, what are you having to do differently compared to assuming, for example, funding was infinitely available, sort of thing? Are you seeing anything changing in your business? I mean, because of what you're seeing, hearing, reading about?
That's a very, very important question, because it is something that has kept me up at night over the last 3 months or so. No doubt about this, that if we were out there raising money in this environment, we would have found it maybe 5x or 10x more difficult than it was 1 year ago, right? So what happened is that a lot of companies got funded, some great, some not that great. And what happens in this case is a lot of founders get overconfident about their ability to run a company when it's just that the market is so frothy that everyone is rising up, right? So we've raised money recently, and now it is for us as a company to prove that our investors and the world out there is right in funding us, because as much as this is the funding winter, we also have to realize that 1 year ago it was a funding rainfall, right? So if today the breaks are irrational, which a lot of founders tell me that, hey, maybe the response that the VC world has taken to maybe the inflation or the Fed increasing the rates, if that is irrational, what was happening in the last couple of years was also to a certain extent irrational, where a lot of companies were getting funded, some that shouldn't have. What is happening now though, as we've raised funding, and I would rather be in this stage than not, but it's very important to be careful not to run out of that money as well, right? Because we don't know how long is this slowdown going to last. And with the money raised, and we've run this company for 6 years now, and we've only had a lot of money to spend for the last 4 months. And that's such an interesting place to be, because for the last 5 years, we've not had the money to execute on a lot of things, and we always blamed capital. And now that we have capital, we've realized, hey, execution is more about just having capital.
It's more than just capital.
It's more than just capital. So what we are doing now, and I made a couple...
Prabhdeep, I want to ask you to build on that.
Yeah, I'm just... look, clearly, the group here has defined me as young. I am 35. I'm still happy to be defined as young, at least on this panel. I think we've just brought in leaders who are, some are in their mid-40s, a couple of them are touching 50. And for someone as young as I am, from their vantage, how do I lead them, right? I've only led a very junior team for last 5 years, and suddenly I have to coach myself externally and through all the internal, the readings, the podcasts, right? In this environment, to be able to manage people is not easy. Everyone is insecure whether the company will run out of money. Everyone is insecure whether this is the right idea to place their bets on, their career on. So I think good leaders, and I'm learning from them, are able during this time to actually use their runway, 6 months, 9 months, 2 years, whatever, to use it as a competitive advantage. Right? This is the time that you actually use money in the bank as a competitive advantage. So as a category leader, right, I have realized that this is a very important moment in time for us to widen the lead. One thing that is for sure is that the funding winter is not only me or you, it's everyone else, including my competition, right? If my competition is thinking as much as about their funding as I am, right, then perhaps by thinking less about funding and focusing more on execution, I can have a competitive advantage. So we are aligning the entire company now to stop thinking about funding, stop thinking about vanity metrics, and focus on operational excellence, getting sustainable growth, and having a path to profitability, right? As the situation improves, then that company will be able to absorb the capital in a more nuanced manner than just burning it, chasing consumers.
Sure. So I just want to a follow-up question to that. So you said path to profitability, operational excellence. So what are, let's say, maybe 2 or 3 initiatives you've undertaken now, right? Which hopefully you can share, as long as it's not confidential. What are the 2, 3 things specifically you've done now to be able to, to manage this very challenging,
Look, I am assuming a lot of you here are founders, and we often live in this, we trust that everyone else is doing a good job at doing their jobs. And what I've realized is that sometimes that's not true, especially when it comes to costs. So what I've done is I've basically made sure that a lot of costs come to the top for approval, right? And a lot of, if we can collect faster, Vani mentioned about working capital. I've done 2 MBAs and no one spoke about cash flow. I've run a startup for 5.5 years now. Before funding, no one spoke about cash flows, right? And cash flows, how the money moves, comes in, goes out of the company in an environment like this is very, very important art and science to monitor and learn. So the first thing that we've done is we've made sure that we don't spend good money chasing stupid things. We've internally defined what are good things and what are stupid things. And then we've made sure that the good money has an approval matrix before it gets out. Simple things, you want to recruit a leader, an agency would have charged 30% 6 months ago. They will still charge 30% if you don't negotiate with them. So a recruitment firm today is not getting paid more than 13 to 15% in our company, or we'll not work with them, right? 6 months ago, they won't work with you if you don't pay them 30%. Now the world is different, and you put the pause on costs. And then receivables. I am now calling my customers personally and saying, hey, you know what? We've given you enough leeway. It's time to send that capital our way, because it's an interest-free loan to our customers. And a lot of startups do that unnecessarily.
So you're financing your customers' business, basically.
Yep. Then, wherever costs can be curtailed or postponed, we are doing that.
Okay.
Right? And the last thing is over-communicating. We are, from my desk, from our leaders' desk, we are making sure that we tell everyone, this is not the same world we were. While there is a note of pessimism, but there is a optimistic message that let's pass through this 3, 6, 9 month period. We will come and emerge out of this much stronger.
Sure. So I'm just going to go to Sandeep, right? So Sandeep, going back to the same question which I asked Prabhdeep, what are the things you've done? I know you have money in the bank and all of that, but obviously I'm sure there's a bunch of measures you have taken or a set of initiatives you've rolled out, right? Because no one knows how long this could last, right, potentially. What have you done?
No, absolutely. And I'll classify it into 2 parts. Every organization you see, every startup you see, we call it 0 to 1 journey or 1 to 10 journey, right? So as a startup, either you are in your 0 to 1 phase or 1 to 10 phase. And the measures you take in both these phases are very different. In fact, if you're in your 0 to 1 journey and winter has arrived, it gets a little difficult because you are just building up things. If you're in 1 to 10 phase, you have a lot in your hand to control. And fortunately, we have been in 1 to 10 phase a scale organization. So it just gives you a lot many more areas to control. In fact, I'll tell you an interesting incident. We keep getting some posts around startup, KPIs and all. Until about 8 months ago, we used to get this post and it was all about CAGR, funding, X factor in valuation. These were the things people were looking at. 3 months back, I was very glad to see some of the KPIs like customer acquisition cost, lifetime value of a customer, how much runway do you have, what's the, your burn on monthly, quarterly basis, and what's the balance that you have in your account. These are the right metrics to measure. And there is a saying, there are in fact 2 sayings I would want to call out. One is, whatever gets measured gets improved. And in the startup world, and I've lived 3 journeys in 2001, 2008, and one I'm living now. So one of the things I've seen is we don't measure the right metrics. So the first step, which I would suggest, and we follow it very rigorously internally, measure the right metrics, because whatever gets measured gets improved. And some of the metrics we heard earlier, you have to keep a tab on this. What's your burn? What's your customer acquisition cost, lifetime value? What's your EBITDA? Many stories end at ARR or GMV. That's a very, very popular KPI in the VC world, or at least it was very, very popular up to 1 year ago. But now, GM, contribution margin, EBITDA is starting to play a role. So measure these metrics. That's the first thing that you do. Second is, again, see, this is not an on-off switch that you can build. Sustainability, as much as it applies to the environment, it applies to the organization as well. We should build practices which are sustainable in an organization. You cannot become very flamboyant at one stage and suddenly look at switching back. That's never sustainable. And that's, again, the second thing which we practice very, very rigorously. Frugality is a term that we use. One part is having the term, second is truly practicing it. And the segment we are in, B2B commerce, is a very cutthroat, it's a very low margin business. So frugality has to be practiced on the ground from day one. You cannot, when it's summer, you cannot keep the frugality aside, and when winter comes, because that has a negative impact on employees. So we are very frugal in our approach. We take those decisions very carefully. And for 1 to 10 organizations, the third thing that we are very carefully looking at is, see, there is always a growth strategy, or you can say a scale or more consolidation strategy. In growth strategy, you look at starting new business units, opening new geographies and all. At this point of time, it's more about consolidating your position in what you have already built rather than going after the new world. So it's like a bird in hand is better than 2 in the bush, right? So that's the other approach. And again, the second quote which I was talking about is, a steady sea never makes a skilled sailor, right? So I'm actually very glad that winter has arrived, because the kind of randomness otherwise we were saying, and it causes a lot of anxiety internally also, I can tell you. Even if you're not raising, we don't need money, we are not raising capital. But then you hear from the market that so-and-so has raised 300 million at 3 billion valuation when they were 1 billion about a year ago. And then talks start internally, even among the leadership team, are we doing something wrong? Should we think about it? And it starts to distract you a little bit. Funding starts to drive your thought process rather than focusing on what you're doing well and what you should be building on, right? So again, I would say you've got a rough sea, prove your sailing skills and ride the tide. And that's what will make you a long-term player. That's...
Thanks, Sandeep. I think some great points. I just want to summarize a little bit. I want to bring in my perspective. One of the things I was taught many years ago, they didn't teach us this in MBA, but a good boss of mine taught me, was, he said, revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, and cash flow is reality. And I think too often founders tend to forget that. So that was one. And I think the point you made about metrics, right? Putting in measures, CAC and LTV and some of those, I think are great takeaways. There's a point you wanted to make?
So just to stretch that one last topic that you said, right? As early stage founders, there's no bigger or worse feeling than the FOMO you feel every time you open a newspaper and you see someone else getting funded. It's the worst.
And sometimes it's not even true, right? Don't read the news and think it's real, right?
Yeah.
So, because I know companies that raised like 10 million and the reporting says they raised 40 million.
Yeah.
And so everything you read.
Yeah. And you know, as early stage entrepreneurs, you go through this massive FOMO that why is everyone else able to raise and not me? And that distracts you from the core business, which is to actually build products that, you know, have value. So this, in a way, is a blessing in disguise. You have a quiet time without those flashy news to go and build your business.
Okay. So I'm going to come to Vani now. So Vani, this constant struggle between growth versus profitability, right? You know, obviously there are certain points where you want to press the pedal and grow and this. So in this environment, right, given what you're seeing, what is your advice to our young founders here? Or what do you tell your companies, I mean, maybe?
Yeah, see, listen, you can't grow too slowly also. Let's just take a step back. You have to ask yourself a set of questions. Do you really have a great product, right, that someone really wants? It could be consumer, business to business, and you may, and here is where, of course, it's like I love my baby syndrome. You have to really be truly convinced that I have something that's a great and a unique product. Because any amount of growth on a bad product is going to come down like a, you know, falling cards. And how do you measure that? We talked about measurement. What's your retention? What's your churn? What's your customer love? You know, what's like the time to implementation if you're a B2B? You know, there are different measures, but are you really in a best-in-class product? Let's assume you're not. It can take time. I built enterprise products when I was an entrepreneur. I remember we spent a whole year building this product, went into the market, nothing to do with funding winter or whatever, went into the market, and as we sat with the customers, I realized we actually had the wrong product, right? It has nothing to do with the engineering design and level of effort that went into coding. Now you have to make a call, and leadership is all about making difficult decisions. I came back and said, we have to change the product direction almost like 70-80%. So only a small amount we can retain. Of course, some of the engineers are upset because they put their
Heart and soul into it.
effort, right? And now you say this product is not good, not because your code or something is not good, but the market, this is not the right product. But you have to make those calls, and they're not easy calls to make, and you have to carry people with you. At that time, you should not really be spending money on customers, right? Regardless of whatever stage you are in, from a growth perspective, it's no point trying to also change the product and acquire customers at the same time. That's, as they say, trying to fuel a plane mid-air, or whatever metaphor you want to use. So many startups make this mistake. They don't want to acknowledge and take the time. It doesn't matter. Take a step back, 3 months, 6 months, a year. It's not end of the world. I mean, companies like Microsoft are still growing, and they are 40-year-old startups, so to speak. Apple, they're still inventing. So there is a future, but you got to build great products, right? And you have to sort of have the courage to build great products. Growth otherwise is useless. Second is unit economics. This notion profitable versus growth is really, you know, we are cheating ourselves. What does that really even mean? If you are CM1 negative, you know, your contribution margin is negative, right? That's okay when you're piloting the product, when you're trying to sort of discover, you know, and maybe for the first year it's okay. For a small amount of burn, it is okay. But to, if you are willing to give away 100 rupees for the price of 80 rupees, then, you know, you can give away a lot of 100 rupees. There is no problem. You can have a lot of growth, right? So that is not the point. The point is, do you have right unit economics? It doesn't mean at a company level you are profitable. You don't have to be for a long time, actually. If you have a great product, customers need it, and you have good unit economics, then grow. Any market doesn't matter. Actually, in these kind of markets is where if you can acquire market share, that doesn't mean you go crazy on CAC or things like that. You have a great product. This is the time to acquire a customer base also. So it's not growth versus profitability. It is a right kind of growth. And to me, if you have confidence in your product and in your unit economics and your operational capacity to scale, that's a third point. You may have a good product. Think of it like we all think of like a new restaurant, right? It's great, and you tell 100 friends, and you went there, it was great, and after some time, somehow, you know, you say the food is not so good anymore. What does that really mean? They couldn't maintain the same standard, same quality. They couldn't actually scale the operations, right, to maintain the consistent quality. It's the same at any place. Doesn't just have to be a restaurant. Every business also. I think what worked in the beginning is you kind of held everything together, right? Maybe as the CEO, you're involved in every aspect of the business. But if this has to scale, it is not going to scale that way. What are the systems and processes you have put in order to truly scale without losing quality? And many companies actually don't understand, A, how to do it, B, their costs go up exponentially. It's not the same cost, right? I have seen this innumerable number of times. Oh, we got these great metrics and you have 1 or 2 stores. Well, by the time you get to 50 stores, everything has changed from those costs, and that business is no longer actually interesting, right? So you have to be able to think about scaling. If you have those 3 things, people who can help scale the business, really good unit economics, really great product, there's no reason for you to hold back growth. You should grow at the best pace that you're capable of growing, right? So, and you will find the capital for such growth, because that's good growth. So this is not it's a theoretical debate only, growth versus profitability, right? So I think young companies will get rewarded for the level of growth. So sometimes people have this question on valuation. Why does a old school company, which has all of this, get valued at X, but supposedly this startup has this big valuation? Because the old school company is probably growing at 10% CAGR or whatever it is, and maybe this company is growing at 200%, and you think that they have the opportunity to do that for the next 5 years, let us say. So obviously it will get a better valuation, you know. So it is also that you can't build companies if there is no growth. If there is no growth, somebody else will, and the market is real, you know, and there is a real need for a customer, somebody else will serve it. You know, I've never thought that I'm like the only person with a smart idea. The world is full of smart people. If I don't take my due share, somebody else will go there and take it.
So to summarize, continue to focus on building a great product, find the right set of customers, the product market fit, and execute what you said, right? Okay, Prabhdeep, I'm going to come to you, right, now, and then I'll come back to Sandeep. So as a CEO's, a founder's job is a lonely, tough job, right? I'm sure you've probably had many sleepless nights thinking about what's going to happen before you raise money and now after you raise money. So as a founder, right, what would you tell our young founders, right? From what do you see, how has your role changed during this time? You know, how have you evolved, morphed, and so on? That's one part. Second is, how do you, this whole thing about some of the things you said, starting to look at cost at a very unit level type of thing, which also calls for you to take tough calls. How do you handle them in a way where whatever culture you're building, right, doesn't get, destroyed in the process.
So your first question is, how has the funding changed me, or how has the funding changed the company?
Both.
It's made me extremely responsible. Forced me almost to be very responsible, because this is not my money. And I think my core job is to maximize shareholders' value. And that means that the money that has come has to be deployed in the most efficient manner to generate the
Maximum
most disproportionate amount of returns possible. So what this means is, as Vani said, what the future investor is going to look at is, have we built a good business? And that's going to be defined by, have we grown sustainably? Is the product loved by the customers? Are we, like for example, very practically in our, from our vantage, are we responding in 30 minutes, 20 minutes, or 10 minutes? No one wants an ambulance that reaches in 60 minutes, even if it's the most cost-efficient product. We want to deliver an ambulance that reaches in 8 to 10 minutes, and that will require some forward investments. And as a CEO, my primary responsibility is also resource allocation. So what this means is that instead of spending perhaps on a large branding work, we are now putting that money in reducing our ETAs. Because we believe what we will do now, we may get engineers cheaper, which was absolutely, and the world knows it. It was so difficult a year ago. We also know that we will be able to get talent cheaper, non-engineering talent. We'll be able to also build technologies, because funding winter, as I said, is not only for us, it's for everyone out there in the world. So there's a lot of discounts available if you go looking for them. So my core job is resource allocation and being very, very careful that we are not stifling our growth. So cost rationalization has to happen. Cost cutting has to happen where it is non-strategic. Go back to the core, as was mentioned, but that doesn't mean it has to come at the expense of core business, core metrics, or sustainable growth. So that's my learning post the fundraise. You asked me two questions. Can you repeat the second one?
Second one was, how do you, this whole thing about taking tough calls, right? Because end of the day, you're impacting people and,
I don't have an answer on how the tough calls get taken, but at a certain point, I think जब वो पानी नाक तक आ जाता है ना, वो tough call automatically हो जाती है. And as a founder, I think what you get trained for is that you don't need to take a decision when the water's here, and you anticipate and you start designing the organization for that call. Whether it is laying off people, for example, the internet's full of stories where founders waited too long to lay off people and suddenly it blew up, right? But as a founder, if you're so non-connected that you're waiting till then for things to happen, then perhaps you're not doing your duty right. So I don't have an answer, first of all, right? So I am speculating on those tough calls, but how I have taken those tough calls.
So let me kind of rephrase that, right? Has your style of communication changed
Yes.
because of this? And what have you done differently?
Yes. My style has changed. It has become more assertive. I have become more goal-oriented, and I have also made productivity the focus. That means that there are no free lunches now, right? Literally in some cases in many companies, and metaphorically in many places, because when the tide rises, a lot of things rise with the tide, right? And when the tide goes down, you see actually what's there. So what's happening now as the tide goes down, we are seeing a lot of clutter, a lot of opportunities to improve employee productivity, right? Sometimes that requires having a hard conversation, asking the person, hey, what is the value you're bringing on? And those are the tough conversations that I am training myself to have, and it's an ongoing exercise.
Sure. Sandeep, we can build on what Prabhdeep said. How have you changed as a person?
Yeah.
And, and all of that.
I'll tell you a story. And, still young, when you have been married for 26 years and 2 kids to college, the answer changes. You learn to, and I'll tell you a story. This is my daughter, and daughters are, we all know, very close to the father. I think she was about 2.5 years old. We decided to send her to school. That both me and my wife are working. We said it's good they spend some time at a play school. Day one, I went to drop her to the play school. And the play school had this fencing, wooden fencing, low height, not a very tall fencing. She was continuously crying. She knew that we are going to leave her there. I held her in my hands and I just crossed her over the fencing and put her onto the school side. And the crying grew louder and louder. I just turned around, and started walking away. I could hear her. My heart was still, feeling extremely bad. But the decision was driven by a father's decision that the daughter has to become successful and has to go to the school. And it's just that, what part of your decision making takes over at that point of time, and what's your true intent. I think intention, I'm a very, very firm believer in what's your intent when you make a decision. And those of you who believe in Hindu philosophy, mythology, have followed Gita, that's what they have taught, that these are just decisions you're taking which are important. There's no right or wrong part to it, right? So I just walked away. I could still hear her crying. I sat inside the car, shut the door. I couldn't hear the crying. I assumed it as she has stopped crying. And I just drove away. Incident 2, if you look at, I got a call from home. They were home alone. She had fallen down and she hurt herself. My office was about 15 minutes away. She called that I fell and I have hurt myself. She was again crying. I did not even see which call I am on, who is sitting in my room. I just lifted my car keys and left the office that very second. 15 minutes I was at home, took her to the doc, it was fine. Same situation, you are hearing your daughter crying. My actions were very different in both the cases. Because the demand of that situation was that in case 2, I had to be with my daughter at any cost. In case 1, I had to teach her to be in the school every day, not just for that particular day. So I think when you contextualize things and realize what role you're playing, what he also highlighted, that when you're at the top of the ladder, right, there's no one else you are going to blame it on. That's your buck stops at you. So the day buck stops at you, you'll make right decisions. Just keep your intent clean. Intent can't be, and you can't be a confused soul. I can't be a confused father कि यार उठा लूँ क्या, रो रही है, बहुत ज़्यादा रो रही है, थोड़ा चुप करा. There is nothing called थोड़ा चुप. Moment you turn around and you have hugged her, you have created a problem for yourself for every day. Because she will expect that you're going to turn around and hug her. I remember she crying for another day or 2. After that, she knew that this is the new SOP. That's what you have to just follow at the organization as well.
Thank you for sharing a really personal story. Fascinating, situation, context dependent response and intent. I think 2 great points. Okay, so I think we are almost running out of time. So I'm going to quickly go around the table and I'll start with you, Vani. I'll call you Vani Garu now, just to pay back, right? Quickly, in terms of one question, if there were 3 mantras you want to share with our audience, what they should do, okay? Or first of all, how long do you think this will last? Or it's just, as he said, a seasonal thing which you have to live with. Second is if there are 2 or 3 key messages you want to share with our young founders here, and we'll just quickly go around.
You have to be bold and you have to be able to pursue that dream. Fear and doubt have their place, but for the most part, if they paralyze you from action, they have no role really. So I think being able to dream and keep that dream alive. Second is being able to take bold action. There are many decisions to be made, and it requires a certain inner courage, inner conviction to be able to go about doing that on a day-to-day basis. So do that. Act rather than just wait. Whatever that act is, but be prepared to do that. I think too much is made out of this whole funding thing. You get it, you don't get it, you get it today, you get it a year from now. Just go look for inspiration. That's what I would say. Inspiration comes from many places. You know, I look at how did this company get built. They took 4 years to redo their product, like Slack, okay? It was not an instant success. Nobody was, like Notion, nobody was willing to fund them. They said, "Ye kya hai?" Right? So, funding is not, it's required, but it'll come when it comes. But don't think that defines your success. You can transcend momentary access or lack of access to funding and work on, what it is that you believe. And if that has real value, sooner or later you will get funding. And you will have to have the staying power. So you must have a staying power to be able to see through your dream. Many times, this is not an easy road. If you see NASDAQ just because it's a proxy to technology companies, in 15 years, if you look at companies listed 15 years back in the top versus today, 90% of the companies won't exist, right? With technology changes, there may be good companies, great companies have to continue to reinvent themselves. So I think there is always opportunity. There is something that is a new opportunity every day. So you will have to kind of figure out, today, what is the universe I can build? So, dream big, be bold in action, have kind of the patience and keep working for that moment for you, and focus on product and customers above all else. Don't overthink this funding as the identity of success. Funding is not your identity of success, should never be.
Funding is not the nirvana. Funding is not the nirvana. Thank you.
Funding
Great.
is a means to an end. And oftentimes, this newspaper thing that Prab talked about and everything also, I have said this so many times to all the editors, reporters, why are we reporting this funding? Can we report how many customers they served? What was the innovation in the product? Or what delighted the customers? Those don't come out at all. And, we have this false notion that my measure of worth is funding. It's not.
Sure. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you, Vani. So let me just flip the order around. We'll have the young man have the last word on this. So let's go with Sandeep.
Last message?
Yeah, the last message. 3 key takeaways which you would like to share with our audience.
I'll probably give one takeaway. I think that will have many built into it. And this is again a saying. I enjoy these sayings. And interestingly, you do a few startups, all these sayings start to make sense. Earlier, they were all kahavat, proverb for me, English, exam articles. A lot of them started making sense after I did 3 startups. And this is my favorite one, the one I'm going to tell you. It says that an entrepreneur is someone who jumps off the cliff first and then tries to build the glider on the way down. And it says a lot of things about the behavior of an entrepreneur, be it bias of action, clarity of thoughts, value proposition. And as Vani said, funding is the amount of money you need to build the glider. You're not going to put the money in the backpack and then land on the ground, even if glider is not built. You're going to hit the ground and die. So important part is build the glider. That's why you have jumped. Now money you need is just enough to build the glider and it should fly. So that's a very, very important thing. You will feel scared on your way. If you're an entrepreneur, be prepared. You have jumped, you should be scared. You might be running out of money. That's again a very natural feeling. So a lot of these things, and in India, many a times we feel happy or scared based on what's happening in the neighbor's house. Right? बाजू वाले का बच्चा IIT चला गया, we get nervous कि यार ये IIT चला गया, हमारा तो पढ़ता ही नहीं है. right? The guy got funding of $300 million. I'm still looking for VCs who will give me first appointment, right? So all these things are immaterial. If you have the right idea, you have jumped off the cliff. I hope there are no part-time entrepreneurs in the room, because I've seen many of them in India who are saying, I'm working in XYZ company, but since it's work from home and after 4 o'clock I'm free, I have done a startup. It's not going to work, right? So stop that. If anyone is thinking that will make you an entrepreneur, you have to be jumping off the cliff. The fear has to be there, bias for action has to be there, and fast decision making has to be there. That's what my message will be with single saying.
Be bold, be decisive is, kind of echoed what Vani said. Great. So the young man will have the last word.
So, philosophically, I believe in the India story. Very important. I went abroad to study, got a job there, moved back to do this. But you have to, at the very, very core of your heart, believe in the India story. The consumer sentiment is very, very high, even if investor sentiment is not. All flights are full, all hotels are full. Qmart or Dmart, dono ke bahar line lagi hai, right? Demand, there is a general upward mobility that is happening that is going to bring a lot of people to our doorsteps if you build good products. That's point number one, which is very important because at a macro level, the story works. Number two, showing up matters. That's for me the very important thing. You can't sit at home, stay on your phone, and products don't get built like this. Like Sandeep mentioned, wo koodna padta hai. You have to take that jump off the cliff. Showing up matters, whether it is in front of your customer's office and waiting for 4 hours. I've done that all my life. Or to your office every day, or in those difficult conversations that you asked me about. Showing up is really important. And third is you have to be very authentic and to a certain extent vulnerable, right? No one has solved for everything. We all live through our insecurities. Whether you've raised 100 million or 200 million, we all have our insecurities. You have to be authentic and vulnerable, and it is okay to be insecure. You got to show up every morning and you got to solve for today. One saying that I love is we overestimate as humans, I do, we overestimate how much can we do in a day, and we grossly underestimate how much we get done in a year, right? So that's why my daily checklist is 10 points long, but my yearly checklist is 3, right?
Great point.
So strange. But that means that show up, keep working, keep grinding on a daily basis, and you will be surprised by how much you've built in a year.
Thank you. Great point. Great close to this. We don't have too much time for questions.
This is Ashish, and one question I have is, we have a revenue of say 800K right now, and it's non-recurring revenue. So my question is, should we go for funding now or wait for recurring revenue?
There is no yes or no answer to should we go for funding now or not. It all depends. It's such a highly contextualized question. If you need money to complete something you're not able to complete, just the glider example, you're flying down, right? You should know how much money you have with you to build the glider. Is that enough to build it? And will you be able to build it before you hit the ground? I think these are the questions you have to ask. That I don't know how much funds you've got, what are you trying to build, how much money will it take? If you seriously feel that there are few things you're not able to do which are must do, and you need money for that, you must raise it, put it from your own pocket, whatever. If you think you're good, you'll be able to build what is needed to launch the product, then just continue. And then raise at the right points. It's a very timing issue, right? So it's like a cricketer asking me, ki ball is coming, should I hit a 6? I don't know, what's your asking rate? If you need 4 runs to win, you don't need to hit a 6. A 4 will also make you win. If you need a single, just run a single and finish the match. If the pitch is very, very bouncy, don't take risk, you'll get out.
Right.
So it's a very loaded question, which I don't think it'll be fair for us to say, raise funding quickly.
Yeah, I should.
Thanks for taking my question. My name is Ajay Sharma. I am a wealth manager, and This is an interesting perspective because we're missing one key stakeholder, and that's the investor's perspective. What should a VC fund manager or a VC fund investor be thinking of this funding winter? So this is mostly directed at Vani Kola. What do you think about this? Should an investor now buy into a VC fund, or wait, or trust that the VC fund manager will do the right thing, hold on to cash? What do you think?
You know, I wish there was silver bullet answers to all questions, but I don't know. I mean, VC funds are 10-year-long funds, and they're highly, highly liquid funds. It's a very, very special class of portfolio. Venture investing is a very, very high risk opportunity with a very high return. Like with any investment opportunity, you will have to do the work to say, is this the right fund manager? It's not that different than you putting money into a PMS fund or a mutual fund. What is the process you go through? Maybe the process is a little easier because you have enough literature. Secondly, maybe because it has published historical returns, then you can also make your decision that way. They're not that illiquid. You can get in, but you can get out. And more familiarity over time. But even then, you will research the fund manager, you will research their strategy. Is this something I want to do? And so I think most people should not invest in VC funds.
Let's say that I have a client who has a 10% exposure to private investments, whether that's 10 crores or 100 crores or whatever. Should I be advising them now to buy VC funds? Or because I see there's a funding winter, I see companies being marked down, I see the largest VC fund in the world losing 50% of its value. So should I be apprehensive as a capital allocator? Or should I
No, but
trust
the largest VC fund, like a tiger losing 50% value, but what about the smallest VC funds, which is where your clients are likely to be investing, have probably gained in value? We have distributed the highest amount of capital to our investors ever in the last 10 years, last year. But the question is not about losing the value, because the decision you make today, the returns are going to come 7 minimum, if not 10 years from now, right? So you're investing into a future, you're not investing at all into the present or the past. So what is your prognosis for India? It depends. Are they investing in an India fund? I assume they are, because we are sitting here. So I think I'm betting high on India over the next decade. Now, your client could be ready to bet or not. And within that, it's not that simple, right? Are they investing into what kind of a venture fund? If it's a very experienced manager who has seen ups and downs, maybe that's fine. Maybe if you're investing in a Web3 fund, because every fund has a certain focus of what is it that they're going to invest in turn, right? So suppose it's a Web3 fund, or maybe it's just a gaming fund or something else, I don't know. So you have to study the prospectus, right? Generally, if you already have allocation and you have the risk appetite, let me put it this way. I always invest when markets are bad. And when markets are high, I'm not trying to make money. Let me put it that way, right? And more importantly, if there is one principle in investing, both personal or professional, I don't change my philosophy around it. I'm not greedy. Most of the time, you're doing emotional investing. Or maybe it will go up still, let me hold on to it. You don't want to sell it. And then, of course, everybody here has gone through this. Same thing, VCs also sometimes do that. Founders do that. They should sell their company, they got a great value, but they hold on out of wrong reasons. If they have a right reason, I can win the market, blah, 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 that's okay. So a VC fund manager who has historically shown returns and knows that, there are ups and downs to market, but over a 10-year period, you have to create a positive IRR return, and there are funds with that track record. And, so if you don't invest now, when would you invest? Certainly last year, investing was probably the wrong reason, because you're paying a high valuation. Today, we can only go up from here. At least that's the bet I am making, right? And all financial advice should be taken with a pinch of salt. But, I don't know, if you don't invest now, then into this asset class, if you can afford it, then, when would you invest? But in general, I would advise most people to not invest in this asset class. It's just something where, unless you're willing to be illiquid for 10 years and be able to take that kind of risk, which, they hear so much money is made in the VC, but they don't see the downside part. You should understand that, this is a very, very long road before you see any money coming back to you.
Is age of the founder a factor when you're investing as a VC? Direct question to you, Vani.
I don't think so. I think every age has a certain advantage. Clearly, if you're going to build some, Web3 metaverse, some, Monkey Kong, NFT, maybe you and I don't relate to it, but you can build other kind of companies also. So I don't think age is a factor. And in fact, in your own mind, you should not let something be a factor that, you say, I'm building a valuable business, and it's for the investor who's smart to see the value of what I'm creating. But obviously, this is written enough. Somebody like a Falguni says, I'm going to go build a company. And it doesn't matter. Maybe 10 people say, I don't want to invest, you're a woman, or you're too old, or there's enough people in beauty, or whatever. But as you show progress, you get respect. So all these other factors go away. And obviously, she's done very well, starting as a founder after 50, right? So if she can, why not you or me or anybody else? So I don't think age is a big factor, and I don't think VCs are, there's a lot of myths about VCs, but, that they only look at young founders is one of those myths.
So thank you all for being here, and I want to especially thank all my panelists, Vani Garu, Prabhdeep, and Sandeep. Thank you for being here, and I hope all of you got something out of this, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.